Well, there has been a lot of deal-making behind closed doors at the World Economic Forum 2022 here in Davos, Switzerland, and there has been other discussions as well that seek to take the world forward. And one of those discussions has been about how the markets have reacted to the market shocks of COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. Joining me now to talk about these is Leila Fourie, who is the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Thank you very much, Leila, for joining us. There has been a discussion that you actually were part of a panel of, and you actually spoke about how markets around the world are not reflective of what is happening with the economy on the ground. Personally, I would feel that there's nothing markets can do because they are forward-looking while the economy is actually looking at the ground right now. What was your message as to what can actually be done about making sure that the market success is actually reflective in economic growth?
Well, Xolani, free markets really price in what's happening in the future. And what we saw at the beginning of the crisis is that many investors, particularly in the US, invested heavily in technology, and they placed a high valuation on tech companies, and we saw an enormous surge, and that was very different to what we were seeing on the ground, where GDP was all going into negative territory. And now what we've seen is, year to date, all of the FANGs, that's Facebook and all the tech companies, are down by 38%. At the same time, the real issue right now is that inflation is growing. Normally inflation grows because of economic growth. Unfortunately, right now inflation is growing because of two key factors. Firstly, the China lockdown, and secondly, which is dislocating supply chains and causing prices to rise, and secondly, the oil price, which is causing prices to rise. So right now we're starting to see rates rising, and it's not because of growth. Normally rates rise to curb the growth, and so there is becoming a very difficult dynamic between what's happening in the markets and what's happening down on the ground. And there is a high risk that countries, particularly in the European zone, go into a recession because the gas prices are shooting up so high and they're not seeing the economic growth. And so consumers are having to face high interest rates, but they're not having high interest rates because they're spending. And so this is the real problem. In South Africa, we're in a slightly better position. For the first time, South Africa's inflation is much lower than the US inflation, which is north of 8%. We also export more food than we import, which is a very, very strong factor for South Africa. Another very strong factor is that South Africa is the only emerging market where our deficit, our debt, has reduced since the beginning of the COVID crisis, which really puts us in a very good position relative to our peers.